learnings and the tangible things out to do something with them. Let's create an environment where we can actually get work done and speak candidly. So that'll be the first thing, and it's one of my rules. Second, this is not a DEI presentation. I happen to be a DEI guy, but really, as a firm, we are negotiators and facilitators. So we're a tiny shop based in Richmond, Virginia, and we focus on building deep partnerships and helping folks, typically executive leadership teams, have hard conversations and make tough decisions. So we kind of live at the corner of behavioral economics, right? How do humans make decisions and influence? Once we understand how humans make decisions, how do we nudge them in a direction to do the thing we'd like them to do? In this context, we're layering all of the things we talked about on bias and how our brains are wired and how we move forward in the world and the lived experiences we've had and how we build to inclusion. We're taking all of those pieces to understand how we can go accomplish mission in our agencies, our organizations, and our roles every day. So this is not a DEI presentation. This is about humans connecting and collaborating with other humans and how we do that effectively based on the core tenets of DEI, if you will. Really, this is about negotiation. And there are a couple definitions, right? Confer with another so as to arrive at a settlement of some matter, arrange or bring about through conference, discussion, and compromise. We leave off a third definition of negotiation, which is to chart a path through rough terrain to get to our end destination. And that's really what we're doing as we interact with other humans. We're charting a path through biases and entrenched positions and all of the things we believe and the traumas we've experienced to get to a place where we can work together because we understand each other, right? That's the goal, that's the job. And so we're effectively negotiating, whether we're on the same side of the table, negotiating with a problem out here, or opposite sides of the table, trying to find some common solution between us. We are negotiating, and that's what I do for a living. So, as a negotiator, my job is to get to some definitional excellence, and I'll start with a couple pieces. Diversity, all the ways we're both similar and different. We talk about differences often. Differences are good, sure. Let me park an unpopular opinion. If you want to move really fast in a direction, homogeneity is your best friend. All right, that's textbook Clayton Christensen. I built tech companies for a long time and come from the world of innovation. So Christensen wrote often about the innovator's dilemma, if anybody's read that book. What he says is diversity is great for surfacing a wide breadth of options, opinions, potential solutions, but if you want to go accomplish a really important thing tactically in a large organization, get a small homogeneous team and put them on the right direction, right? It's counter to all of the things we talk about in the diversity, equity, and inclusion world, but it's true. Diversity makes things messy. Now, we know we get better ideas out of a diverse team, right? We have some mess to get through to those ideas. We have lived experiences that inform how we can build the solution in a way that is equitable, right? Inclusive, sure. But at its core, when we talk about diversity, part of what we miss, and I want to acknowledge that this group has self-selected into this room. Right? So the folks we have to convince that DEI is important probably aren't here. Those of us who get it and are fighting the good fight and doing the long work are having the conversations internally where it's like diversity is good and somebody could come back and say, nope, build a small homogeneous team and send them in a direction. The problem is a small homogeneous team can get to a place really quickly. We never know if it's the right place unless we've gone through the intellectual rigor of adding diversity to the equation and working through to solutions that tend to be more quality, right? So being able to have that argument, important for the folks who are fighting the good fight against those who don't actually believe we ought to be having the conversation in the first place. I just want to acknowledge and own that diversity is about how we're different, but also how we're similar, and we get to balance and kind of triangulate what makes most sense as we're trying to accomplish outcome. Inclusion, I've got a long definition here, and let me boil inclusion down to a very simple thing. Inclusion, right? A sense of purpose and belonging for all. So that DEI-B, I stick with DEI because I've lumped the B into inclusion as I define it, a sense of purpose and belonging for all. So if I get to work one day and everybody says, hey, we're so glad you're here, but I sit down at my desk and I don't know what I do, right? I've got belonging. It's great. I don't have any purpose. The inverse is also true. If I get to work and nobody's stoked that I'm there, but I know what I do and I get to it and I don't feel like I belong or I'm included, we don't have inclusion, right? So our job as we're thinking about organizations is to build into a culture of inclusion. And wherever you are on the spectrum that is unique to your organization and is dynamic, we're constantly reassessing where we are. So from invisibility, we're not talking about inclusion. We have no idea what that means. To awareness, we've started to acknowledge that, hey, this thing might be important. To intentional inclusion, we're starting to put the ERGs together. We're starting to do some of the things that you all outlined in the last session, right? Strategic inclusion, we're thinking long-term. I've got to start hiring and recruiting and retaining, and I have to be intentional about that now so we can build into the culture we want then. And that culture of inclusion is terminal velocity, it's aspirational, it's really freaking hard to get to, right? But that's the goal, that's where we're heading. And as we work through these 5 stages of inclusion, we put ourselves continually setting our organization up to be a place where people have purpose and belonging. Both of those things is what we're driving toward, right? So full acceptance as a member of a culture. Problem is, if we don't get that right, folks end up covering. Anybody familiar with the term covering? Kenji Yoshino wrote a book, this was probably almost 15 years ago now, called Covering, and basically talked about the things we strip away around our identity. So Dara, you and I will probably have some debate, right, around hiring, for instance. This is one of the nuanced discussions DEI practitioners have. I'd imagine you all are having the same. Do I strip Jamal's name from his resume in order to hire him, right? Or by virtue of saying, Jamal, you can't put your name on your resume, am I taking his identity away from him? That is a hard question to grapple with, and it's a real question that we're all figuring out. But what I don't want is somebody feeling like they can't bring their full selves to work in order to be effective in accomplishing the mission that we've dictated within our organization, our agency, and pointed our people in the right direction. So if we don't get to that sense of purpose and belonging, we have folks, in order to fit in our organization, the person with a physical disability leaves their cane in the car and makes their way into the office despite needing their cane to do that comfortably, right? The person who is transgender or queer, right? My sister identifies as queer, and she's my middle sister. Love her dearly. And it's hard even for a while at our home, right? Because her identity is queer, and my mom's from North Philly, and she grew up in a time where you call family queer and them's fighting words, right? And so even to be able to bring her identity home, to say, hey, I'm queer, my mom's like, ooh, that gives me, and so she just kind of left that identity aside. It's not that she's not gay, it's not that she's not queer. Her ability to talk about that and be fully herself, and my mother has come around. It just took some intellectualism to get there, but that's real, right? The messy family dynamics, the same thing happens in the workplace. Have we stripped somebody's identity, or do they strip them of themselves in order to exist in our organization? We're doing our people, our humans that we interact with daily, a disservice if we're requiring that, or if we haven't thought about it. So again, I mentioned the same school of diversity, equity, inclusion as Dara. We talked about how the brain is wired. Thinking versus feeling is really interesting. Humans, we pretend we're rational and logical, and we know that we're not. Again, for a group that is self-selected into a room where we talk about bias often, we all know that. We are not rational. So my question, what do you think of my mom? My mom. She met my father at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. She was one of the first black cadets there, as he was as well. She transferred out to Michigan, where she played volleyball, and then did her master's in civil engineering at University of Berkeley. She eats differential equations for breakfast, and I've never beaten her at a game of Scrabble. I don't anticipate I will anytime soon. What do you think of my mother? Yeah, amazing. Thank you. She is. I like her, right? So we think of my mom. I've just built a profile for you.
All right, smile for the picture. Really? That's how you wanted to handle that? You gotta look at the camera, though. Just down here.
Where's the camera? There's 3 holes. There's 3 things. Oh, look at all of them.
How do you feel about my mother? Yeah, energetic, hilarious, sense of humor. Right? Yeah. The energy of the room has shifted, right? From what I told you. I gave you the facts about my mother, right? But now that we've seen her, we've felt that, we feel different about that because humans are emotional, right? And we can shift power from the logical, rational, reasoning side of our brain to the emotional side of our brain just by saying, how do you feel, and showing you video, right? In our organizations, understanding that our people are not logical. Hey, you have a job description and a salary, and if you accomplish your job per your job description, you will continue to get the salary that we have dictated you will get, right? That's the logical equation. That's how work should work. I am guilty of that. I celebrate terribly in my organizations. Do as I say, not as I do, right? I'm terrible at celebrating. You know why? What do we need to celebrate for? That's what the money was for, right? But that's not how humans are wired. Humans are emotional, and they want to be supported, and they want to feel seen, and they want to feel included. And so building a culture of inclusion puts us in a position where we stop expecting that humans are going to be illogical and rational. We need that sometimes in our organizations, but moving the power to how folks see themselves, identify in the world, and actually exist. So they're not covering, and they can show up fully and do the work we need because they feel emotionally supported, so they can go be logical and rational in the other areas that we need them to execute task. All right, so I want to talk briefly. Some of the folks who were in the room yesterday for the NASCA Institute will have seen this, but it's worth reiterating. Humans are funny. As we think about diversity, the ways we're different, there are 8, 9 types of intelligence per Howard Gardner at Harvard. And we've got a couple here. Now, what's really, what I appreciate is that folks with a high IQ, right, that logical, mathematical, and a bit of the linguistic, verbal, and visual spatial, see IQ as a great metric of measuring intelligence. That would make sense. You have a high IQ. IQ is the best way to say whether we're intelligent or not. But there are other types of intelligence that we all use differently. So as we're missing somebody in our organization, it may not be because they're not smart, it may be because they're smart differently than we are. And we don't often give space for saying there are 2 types, there are different types of intelligence. There are 2 that are worth focusing on as we talk about humans, that interpersonal, right? How we interact, and then the intrapersonal. So we're talking about how we interact with ourselves and how we interact with others. Those 2 types of intelligence, really important as we start to look at and build a profile around the individual humans we interact with regularly. So again, we've got a room full of DEI practitioners or aficionados here in the room. We've probably seen versions of this diversity wheel, right? As we look at that, the personality, who we are innately, and then that internal ring, the identities we didn't choose out of the gate, right? The secondary ring, the early influences, the things our parents did, our grandparents, the community in which we grew up, the first job we had, the schools we went to, the geography in which we existed, and then that tertiary ring, the things we choose today, things that are our choice, our political affiliation, whether we're involved in some religious group, if we work out regularly, what we eat, if we drink, all of the things that we choose as adults today are encapsulated in the diversity wheel. Now, I'm going to take this out of the, again, not a DEI presentation, a conversation about humans. I'm going to take this out of this realm and put it into mine around negotiation, which starts with understanding motive. Now, these fields are overlapping quite a bit. Right? This probably looks to you like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So that bottom tier survival, that would be food, water, shelter in Maslow's, right? Survival, as it comes to motive, is about the things we will act irrationally to protect. The things we will act irrationally to protect. Now, what's really interesting, and we'll talk a bit about this, is we've got to take this away from who we are and put this in the context of who another person is. The human, the employee that we interact with regularly. It doesn't matter what I think, and I don't get to put value judgment on this. So I grew up with some buddies who were pretty affluent, all right? And they drove the range to school every day. And if mommy or daddy threatened to take away the range, they started acting irrationally, right? For us mere mortals, that seems like a crazy thing. Right? I would never act irrationally about my Range Rover taken away, but it's not about me. It's about them. My job is to understand how they will interact or react to a thing. And so the survival motive, one of the most important things for us to understand, and we'll get to why in a second, at the top of the pyramid. Everything else in the middle, important. You see belonging in there. Identity starts to tie this together. Identity is the way we see ourselves in the world, right? The way that we interact. Think about this as the Facebook or Instagram version of ourselves, right? The way we want to present to the world, not necessarily who we are, but how we see ourselves interacting with and existing in our environment, right? So if we get a handle on those two things, where we'll act irrational and how we see ourselves, those two pieces start to give us a good idea of who a person is. Now, the best part is, what informs those two things are often all of the things you're already thinking about with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The lived experiences, everything in the diversity wheel, the biases, the entrenched positions, all the pieces of how a human is wired will basically distill into where they'll act irrationally and how they see themselves. And so if we focus on those two things in our organization, around the people we interact with every day, we start to get a good idea of how we can nudge, how we can influence, and how we can get them to feel supported so they execute well. All right, so if you're thinking about interacting with a person, all right, can I get a handle on their survival motive? Can I get a handle on their identity motive? And the answer is often, probably. Now, how we do that is often interesting, and I'm looking at Vera. Vera, I'm gonna have you, can we give Vera a mic really quickly? Lovely. So we're gonna play a little game. We're gonna take 5 minutes to see if you all can get to my survival and identity motive. This is Vera's remuneration for the year. This is her bonus. She gets to help you all grill me for a couple minutes. And let's see if we can get to some understanding of where I'll act irrationally and how I see myself in the world. Anybody want to take a first crack? This is called politically incorrect questions, and you can ask anything. Anything is on the table. I will answer truthfully, I promise. And if I don't, this is why V's in the mix. She's my chief of staff, and she knows if I'm answering truthfully and will grill me if I don't. So let's take 5 minutes there. Oh, you're going to start, aren't you?
Oh, I can do some really hard-hitting questions because, you know, my number one personal rule is don't give me a microphone.
Lord knows. Here we go. Any takers on a question? Okay.
If you could create a job title for yourself, what would it be?
It's an incredible question. I don't want to do this anymore. It's the wrong group to do this. Really introspective.
Goal achieved.
Okay. If I could create any job title. I know what the answer is. I wouldn't. I'm just Ace, and I feel like Ace, it's a nickname for what it's worth, but Ace just encapsulates the way I want to be seen in the world. It's just, I'd go by my name.
So then who is Ace?
Why? Why'd you give her the mic?
I'm going to give Kiana my
Kiana.
That's just...
I'm an introvert who's really good at people. I love taking complexity and simplifying it. Some of that is for the people I get to work for and with and around, but I think it's a survival mechanism. Too much complexity freaks me out, and so I've always had a knack for just distilling to the core so we can go do something with that. Hand me a spreadsheet and you see me glaze over, but put me in a room full of people who are also complex, and my ability to pull threads and just get us to some consensus. I'm a mediator, I think, at my core. I do that professionally, but like from 4th grade, where I hosted the morning announcements on live stream to my elementary school every morning, to 5th grade, brand new school. Within a month, they had decided I should start their peer mediation program. Like, I've always just brought people together and put them in a good place. So I think that answers the question. I see some like, oh, that makes sense. I don't know what's happening behind your face right now. All right, William.
What is Ace's greatest weakness, and how does he work to improve that? Or does he work to improve it?
Greatest. Twofold. Ego. My ego's massive, right? Like I think there's like arrogance and humility are right next to each other, but you've got to go all the way around the circle to get there. And I'm not sure if I'm at arrogant or humble. I don't know, and one looks like the other at a point. But I'm aware of that, and so I think I'm actively working on being my harshest critic, being the second one. When I walk off stage today, my first question will be to V, what did I miss? Like, was it good? Sure, that's what I do. This is the only thing I do. Was it good? Absolutely. Was it great? That is where my bar is. And my first question, the only path to that, is to break it down so my team gets infinitely frustrated after we finish a thing, because they're like, that was fucking awesome. And I was like, what did I miss? What did we miss? Where could we have improved? And so I both think I'm great and think I'm trash at the same time. And that would be my answer. Yeah. All right, we got nods there. Kindred spirits. All right, let's take maybe two more. Pam, oh Lord. No, V, you're not allowed to have the mic anymore.
I'm
so you
going to
keep
go
handing it
easy
to
on
people.
you. I'm going to go easy on you.
All right.
What scares you?
Being alone. Yeah, I'm constantly surrounded by people. This is the environment in which I live. I'm never sure if people actually like me or if they just think I look like we should hang out and I'm cool. And that is the cognitive dissonance there is real. It's being alone because people see through some facade. Yeah. Last question. Okay. Jeffrey. Hi.
How do you, because you say you're an introvert.
Sure.
So how do you balance being an introvert and then doing all of this you do
Yeah.
and being with people?
Yeah. Part of it's just the job. Like I was a military brat. So there was my mom's favorite adage was, nobody cares about the storms you encountered. Did you bring in the ship? And so there's just a sense of responsibility to go do the work well. I also need to recharge. So I think between now and Thanksgiving, I'll be home 4 or 5 days. I think I had a day off after being on the road for 2 weeks and came straight here. And so, yeah, it's draining. I need to be with my core group of people, or otherwise I won't recharge. And I get really cranky, and I see V nodding because I'm just insufferable when I'm cranky. So, yeah, I go do the work well, and I love it, but I've got to recharge afterwards. Yeah. Okay. Any burning questions? Anybody want to get one else in? Or can we get to survival motive and identity motive? I'm not sure you're going to be able to get to survival motive. Identity motive. Let's start there. Yeah. And I'm still like hot seat, so I'm gonna cool down up here.
Because I think maybe I'm not understanding, but for your survival, you said something to me was poignant. In that you're an introvert, but you're out here in front of everyone. How do you do that? You have to recharge. You can't do this every single day.
Yeah.
You're not out there looking for people to look at you, and you don't want to be the center of attention.
Yeah.
That's what I get when you say, I have to recharge.
Yeah. Yeah, so where will I start acting irrationally? I think I put words to that, right? I'm insufferable when I'm cranky and I haven't charged. So yeah, that's one. You're absolutely right. Thank you. Anybody else on the survival front? Yeah.
I'm just taking into that what you would act irrationally to
Sure.
maintain, and I would boil it down to adoration. You want people to like you. You want to be loved, but not just like your mom loves you.
Yeah.
Like,
I want it to be real,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, if I'm not feeling like I've done enough there, yeah, probably start acting irrationally. Sure, making some poor decisions. Yep. Identity motive. Anybody want to put some words around how I see myself in the world? Whether you agree with it or not, whether you think I should see myself that way, whether you think I should see myself that way, how do I see myself in the world? Any thoughts? This is not easy, right? It's not. But the job for us to understand people is everything that Dara touched on. Lived experiences, how people need to be supported, how we show up as allies, and the only way to get there is to truly understand who a person is, and that's holistic. It's encompassing. It's not just the topical things we see. It's how we get to understand how a human makes decisions, how they see themselves in the world, where they'll act irrationally, right? All of these pieces start to give us a true handle on how we work alongside, collaborate with, and get to outcome with folks. So yeah, it's tough. Anybody want to take a crack at identity motive? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And you've said over and over again, you help, by mediating, you help people change. So a changer and a mediator.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. Significant. What do you mean by that? God, this is uncomfortable. I love it.
No, I think I feel like you feel like you bring something to the table. You bring knowledge and understanding and comfort.
Yeah.
And that's significant for people to feel safe around you.
Yeah, yeah. You all will decide whether you agree with that or not, but it doesn't matter what you think because I think I'm significant, is what we just put words to. Yeah, sure. All right. Anybody else? We'll take one last one. Yeah.
I don't know the word. I think it's important to you that you bring value and you make your audience happy to your sacrifice. So your audience is more important to you than you.
Yeah, yeah. The
Freddie Mercury of sorts. He was an introvert, but he put on a different persona.
That's the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me. Yeah, there's something there. It's maybe driven by responsibility. Responsible, right? I've got 3 little sisters. Dad's a military guy, so he was always deployed, and I'm the oldest and the only boy. Yeah, there's a sense of responsibility. I'm a Scorpio for anybody who subscribes to horoscopes. So yeah, well, Tammy's waving at me. Yeah, so right, like there's some responsibility boiled into that. Right? Is this important about who I am? No, you all don't work with me, right? But can we get there for our people? Can we get to an understanding of how people will actually make decisions? Because it's not just about the physical attributes or the psychological attributes or being neurodivergent or not. It's not about any one of those things. It's a comprehensive view of how somebody is going to make a decision when stressed, when feeling othered, when they're not part of the in-group, right? In-group and out-group are terms that I like to use because it's contextual and relative. So as a black man in America, I'm part of the out-group, but as a man, particularly in this room, I'm part of the in-group, right? Right? Like that's tough to grapple with. And so how does somebody start to interact when they feel othered or on the outside or on the fringe? How do I support a person? The only way I can truly get there is to understand who they are, right? So, driving motive, as you see, just about everything that was on the diversity wheel is laid next to that motive pyramid. And that gets us to a place where we can start understanding, right? We're not puppet masters. We're not pulling strings. We're not manipulating people, but we are understanding how we can influence their ability to do their work. And part of that is making sure they feel a sense of inclusion in our organization and they feel that they're seen, heard, and supported, right? Seen, heard, supported. Heard is one of the ones I like to talk about, and that signal-to-noise ratio is a term that we use at Envoy. This is borrowed from when we were laying cable across the Atlantic, laying telegraph cable across the Atlantic, and it was how much of the signal, the message we needed to get across the pond got through versus the static around it, the noise, right? People function the same way. My job is to see if I can get as close to every word I say resonates with you all, right? That's hard in a group because people are going to hear different things and feel different things and react or respond differently. But on a one-on-one, if I truly understand who a person is, I can start to have a conversation that means something to them because it's not about me in that instance. And so signal-to-noise ratio, we've got to consider how we communicate and articulate a message to get somebody to do or interact with the world or accomplish mission the way we want them to. That's medium, timing, tone, language, visuals, voice. All of that drives towards somebody hearing what we're telling them and moving in the direction we'd like them to. So what gets in the way? Because Dara did such a great job teeing this up, I'm going to burn through some of these. What gets in the way of truly understanding and interacting with a person? Energy's one of them, right? So you talked about a woolly mammoth, right? I was freaking out when you were talking about mammoths. I was like, but I have a mammoth in my presentation. Stop it, right? Like our brains are wired when we see that or we see a saber-toothed tiger, get out of Dodge, right? The problem is, and the slide that Dara had up was spot on, right? The problem is our brains have not evolved past some of this fight or flight, right? Has anybody heard the term stereotype save time? Right? It's an awful phrase, but there's an element of humanity in that phrase, which is we can shortcut the understanding of who a person is because of how they look or how they talk or where they went to school. We start making flash judgments about who they are, but we are no longer in times where woolly mammoths or saber-toothed tigers are chasing us, and our job is to pause for a second rather than make that assumption about a person, right? We've all probably come across Daniel Kahneman, one of the godfathers of behavioral economics, the world in which I live. Anybody have the answer to this? 2 + 2? Come on, it's not a trick question, I promise. 4, yeah, sure. All right, 8 times 76, go. What was that? Somebody, did you say you don't care? Carry the one, I like that. Right? Most of you were thinking, whether it was said or not, I don't care. You know why? Because our brains are wired to conserve energy. That's why we make flash judgments. It's why we lean into stereotypes. It's why we shortcut how we understand a person. Nobody wants to expend the energy to do that math, whereas 2 + 2 is easy. Right? 8 times 70, I don't even know what the answer is. This is my deck. I probably should have done the math already. I didn't. So if anybody wants to look that up, you can be the winner of this chicken dinner and tell us what 8 times 76 is. The rest of us don't actually care, right? Because our brain is conserving energy to run from the woolly mammoth or the saber-toothed tiger. That's how our brains are wired. If we don't pause to say, am I making a flash judgment about a person rather than starting to understand who they are, we have missed an opportunity to interact with a human. Second, algorithms. Algorithms are getting in the way of our ability to interact with others. It's a great example. We've got a new pizza spot 2 blocks from our office in Richmond, Virginia. And we could have, as the team was hungry, ordered some pizzas via Uber Eats. Those pizzas would have been picked up, and they would have been hand-delivered to our front door, and we would have had pizza, and that would have been great. Instead, what happened is my British counterpart, my lesser half, don't tell him I said that. Tell him I said that, actually. Please do. So Scott, my British counterpart, walked down to Zombie Pizza, and he met Hamed. And Hamed is a North African immigrant who just opened a pizza spot and in pursuit of the American dream. And Scott from London talked to Hamed from North Africa and heard the North African accent. And Hamed was like, wait, you know I'm from North Africa? And they hit it off. And Hamed told Scott about the dough that wasn't quite right for the pizza that he was making and was really excited because Scott was there and Hamed was there and they were both immigrants and they hit it off. And now Hamed drops us pizza every week or two. And our team takes pictures and we send that back to Hamed and he hangs it in his pizza shop. And we've built community as a result. Algorithms get in the way of our ability to understand how humans are wired, how they make decisions, how we work better together, right? The internet is not a fad, unfortunately. It is good sometimes. It is a pain in the rear other times. And Uber Eats would have gotten in the way of connection. Sometimes we've got to order Uber Eats so we can get our kids to soccer and they've got some food in them because life was messy, et cetera, et cetera. Other times, if we pause and say, can I go interact with a human for a second, we put ourselves in a really good position to make decisions around how they interact with the world and how we can be better partners, better allies, better peers, better colleagues to them. All right, so we're all posting about empathy, but at the same time as we're on the Instagram posting about empathy, we are degrading our ability to empathize with other humans. And that's tough, right? Privilege gets in the way. Privilege is one of those buzzwords, trigger words. We all get up in arms about privilege. Why is it controversial? Because it feels like we didn't do the hard work to get to a place. And we've all seen the privilege illustrations. Really, it's just an unearned advantage. That's not good or bad. There's no value judgment to it. I start to judge when somebody has privilege and doesn't do anything with it. right? Acknowledging that we have privilege and deciding how we move the world forward in a way that might be valuable makes sense. But fighting that I don't have privilege or I do have privilege doesn't make sense to me, right? So that having privilege gives you advantages, but privilege is not a guarantee of success. And so we've got a lot of swirling around what privilege is, and it turns people off, and we shut down when we hear that we have privilege. And if we can take a step back and just say there's no value judgment to that. What base you started on is not important. What you do with having had a head start is, right? Just like we can sit with that and we can share that what we do with privilege is important. Media gets in the way as well. And again, talked about this, some overlap. I want to talk about the Beagle Project. That's the bound encoded aggregate of the language environment, if I remember the acronym appropriately. So a sample of what the average college kid would have consumed as they get to their freshman year. And what we see here is some of the bias that is just embedded into everything we consume, the literature, the movies, the books, the podcasts now, right? So the correlation, closer to 1 is high correlation, closer to 0 is less correlation. I've cherry-picked some of the higher ones. So black and poor are terms often married together. Violent, religious, right? With women, distant, warm, gentle. Those seem opposed, but that's what we've collected from data. Male, dominant, leader, logical, white, wealthy, progressive, conventional. This is not our fault that we have some biases that are built in to the fabric of society. Understanding what the biases are and how they influence us is power that we can take and do something with. We now have some privilege in just having seen this data. We can't unsee it, right? You can't come to me the next time I see you and say, I didn't see that slide you put up. We all saw it. We all know that the media is manipulating us, and that's not anti-media, right? I'm not that guy. What I am saying is being intentional about what we consume and understand how it influences us is important. Positions, similarly important. I'll pick a hot button topic, hot trigger topic maybe. There we go. It's the first time I've made that joke. I'm gonna work on it. We're gonna workshop it. I'll get a laugh next time, right? Gun ownership. So, we have one of two positions. If I had to guess based on who is self-selected in the room, I would guess what position quite a number of us have. What's interesting is I'm a military brat and I'm a gun owner and I love to make things go boom. I also appreciate that there's violence built into that and it's not necessarily the most healthy thing for our country and where we are today. And there's a discussion to be had. But positions get in the way of us connecting with humans, right? We have binaries. And they push us apart more than they bring us together. If we can move those binaries to spectrums, we get to a good place. So gun ownership is a symbol of liberty and freedom or a symbol of violence and anarchy, right? We can see that we have different positions and as a result, by extension, different perspectives, right? How we see the world changes based on the lived experiences we've had and the traumas that we've had and the biases we still hold on to, and all of that influences how we see the world. So just because you don't see the world the way I do doesn't mean that you see the world wrong. It means that you've had a different experience, and if I haven't done the work to understand that, it's really hard to understand how we get to a good place together. So what I find to be really fun is taking the binary to a spectrum. So we often debate the right of people to keep and bear arms. We debate the right. That puts us in entrenched positions. We either have the right or we don't. And people get really mad about that debate. It's a messy one. But we could change the conversation to the right to keep and bear arms. Do you have a right is binary. Which arms is a spectrum of choice? Now we get to have a conversation. So when I do this in rooms, we do this with the DoD and folks from NASA and kind of all over the country. We do this in red states and we do it in blue states. And when I say, hey, tell me where you think we should have arms, nobody believes their neighbor Joe should have a frickin' tactical nuke. Nobody believes that. Yet we are debating whether we have the right to or don't have the right to. And so again, around humans and getting to a good place and understanding how they're wired, if we take the binary and put it on a spectrum, we create opportunity, we create space to find where our common ground is. what I'd say is the common ground is often somewhere between semi-automatic and machine gun. That's where at the bell curve of folks are like, yeah, no, that kind of makes sense. That may be where we live, but that's not the conversation we have societally. And maybe we ought to move to a spectrum so we can find some common ground with folks. So what I'm saying here is our job is to take out of entrenched positions, right, the things we believe. We might, in the context of DEI, talk about positions as biases. Things that I have a negative bias against or a positive bias towards would be your positions. And can we move to a mutual interest? Where are we trying to get together? What's the outcome we desire? What is the mission at hand for our work, for our organization, for our agency? A position is solution-oriented. Here is how we should do the thing. Whereas an interest is outcome-oriented. Here's how we need to get to. Here's where we need to go. Our job is to start shifting the way people see the world around us as leaders, so we can make better decisions together. So a couple rapid fire. The wall, we can see protection or waste. Sanctuary cities, we can see law breaking or moral entities. DACA, a legal precedent setting, or the American dream. But all of us believe in safe, legal immigration. That's the common interest that we have. We get up in arms and fight each other around how we've stuck into our positions. I like that, digging the heels in. I feel like Dara right now, right? Digging our heels in. So it's imperfect, but it gets us to optimal outcomes, and that's what we're driving toward as leaders in organizations. You can be right, or you can make progress. You get to choose. It's your prerogative, right? Just introducing the thought that we can be right, or we can make progress. And lastly, what gets in the way? Ourselves.
Is that a person or an animal? I'll swing wide. Headphones are coming out. I need to hear everything. Is he following me? Or are those my own footsteps?
Should I smile and wait?
Pick up the pace.
I'll do both.
Look strong.
No, I'll avoid eye
I should cross the road. There are more lights over there. Follow your shadow in the light. Look for shadows that don't belong. Did I remember to send my beacon to a friend?
I'll mention my husband.
Pick up the pace. Look strong. If I scream, will anyone hear me? Put the keys between my knuckles. I should stop and put my hair in a bun. Why is that car slowing down?
Here come people.
Pick up the pace. Look strong.
Is there a house?
You're getting lost in thought. Stay aware.
Knock on their door if I have to.
Oh, there's a tunnel up ahead. That's no go. Let's reroute. Maybe I should turn back. Maybe I should keep going. Look strong. You're strong.
I'm 6'4", 315 pounds. I'm built like a linebacker. I don't get paid like one, but you know, that's who I am. I don't have that problem. I've never experienced what it is to run at night and wonder if somebody's following me. I've never had to cross the street because somebody is out in the world existing in a way that is dangerous to me. I've never had that experience. Every single woman I know has. It is my job to understand that, to internalize it, to hear when somebody shares that with me, to do something with it, to acknowledge that I'm a large black man, and if I'm behind somebody in the middle of the night, they feel a type of way about it. It's not good. I wish that didn't exist, but that is the reality of our world today, and we get in the way of making space to understand something like that. The lived experience of someone else in a way that I will never have to experience. Post George Floyd, the amount of people who reached out because, oh, Ace is black. Shoot. He's probably feeling a way about this thing, right? As riots were burning down the cities we love dearly, and my stance was protect people over property. The fights I got into with friends who or melanin deprived in a way I am not, and didn't get what I was saying because they didn't take a second to appreciate my lived experience. We get in the way of connecting with others, and our job is to understand the thoughts, the hopes, the fears, the lived experiences of those we work with, those we interact with, those who are making decisions so we can accomplish mission together. If I don't take the time to take it away from who I am, right? And make it about who they are. If I don't take the time to disenthrall myself with myself, I am going to miss every opportunity to connect with the people I need to in my organization. So, The last thing I'll leave you with is that language matters. Cultural language, the language of how we interact with our teams. Anybody culturally Jewish in the room? Okay. Anybody familiar with the term collaborative interruption? If anybody's got a culturally Jewish friend, and they get really excited when you're interacting, and they jump in at the end of your sentence, and they're jamming with you, and when you're starting to finish something, they jump in, and if you're not culturally Jewish, it feels rude because they keep cutting you off when you're trying to have a conversation with them. But the culturally Jewish folks know that that is the way to show that we're engaged. I'm in the mix with you. We're having a conversation, we're rapping, and we're moving at pace, and that's exciting, and we're excited, and that's how I show you I care and I love you. But if we don't understand that cultural language, we miss each other, right? Because to one culture, that's rude, and to the other culture, you're not doing that, which means you're not paying attention to me. You're not hearing me, right? Language matters. The language is certainty in an organization. The reality is, it is, to put this in proper context, and you see my body language. I'm telling you the way of the world. I don't see the world the same way you do, and vice versa, which means if I'm not open, we are going to miss each other. So I currently think this thing, right? I feel it is. From my present perspective, perhaps is my favorite. If we don't shift our language in our organizations, we are going to miss people who communicate differently, use different language, see the world differently than we do. Our job is to make sure we're open in our organizations so our people can connect with us. So I'll leave you with this thought. My job is not to change culture. It's to influence human behavior. It's to tweak the small things that we do so we can communicate, collaborate, and interact with each other better, right? That's my job. The natural byproduct of that is culture change. The natural byproduct of changing human behavior is that culture will change, but culture takes 5, 10, 15, 20 years to shift in an organization. That's real work that ought to be done. It's hard work, and humans get discouraged when we put a 20-year target down the road and say, yep, that's where we're going. But if I say, hey, we're no longer going to use language that says the reality is, we're going to say perhaps. If we make that a mandate in our organization, we start to shift culture, right? If I say, hey, my bias is this, but my interest is that. If I articulate that to my people, then they can come back and say, well, my bias is this, my position is this, but my interest is this, and that puts us in a good place. If we give people the language and the behavior we want to see to create an environment that is inclusive and open and doesn't require covering, all right? If we create that and we're intentional about it, those human behaviors ripple into the wave, the tsunami that ultimately is culture change down the road. And so I encourage all of you as leaders to think about the behaviors you want to see in your organizations, as well as the behaviors you no longer will tolerate, and to be explicit about both. Here's what I want to see, here's what I will no longer tolerate, and that's not aspirational. It's not to say I want women to feel included in my organization. It's to say we will no longer tolerate interruptions in meetings. Those are two different things with the same outcome in mind. One is aspirational and it's not prescriptive. The other is behavior we can change and will change because we're all in pursuit of building cultures of inclusion. So that's my time. Really appreciate y'all hanging out. This was really fun. Thank you.